Hello, beautiful people. I'm Red, and today we're going to talk about how to fix Holy Priest. I've heard rumors that Blizzard is getting pretty close to doing a rework on Holy Priest, and I have some ideas. I've been talking to the priest community and trying to compile a list of things that maybe should change, and most of them are smaller changes that I think could happen mid-expansion. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was mastery. None of our spells currently are really interacting with mastery, and we don't have any talents that directly interact with mastery. I thought a cool new talent could be called Echo's Release. Immediately release the Mastery Echo of Light healing on all targets with Echo on them. This is a new burst healing spell. I envision it being like off global cooldown, so if there's like a big burst that you have to heal, you could like do some pre-healing with some spells and then immediately pop this spell right when that damage happens. And I'm talking about like a when you have to heal the whole group for like 40% or 70% of their health in like a second and a half. This would be really cool. So you could cast like Holy Word Sanctify and then pop Echo's Release and immediately do some big healing. And I thought a cool choice node for this talent would be called Overflowing Echo. So Echo of Light's problem is it does a lot of overhealing, and I thought to combat this problem, you could have like 30% of the overhealing go into nearby allies or something like that. They could really tune that with whatever percentage they want. And then the third talent I think that would be cool for mastery would be something called Prayer Echo, and it would make Prayer of Healing apply like double effectiveness echoes of light. And this is kind of similar to what Druid has with Nourish, where it does like double mastery ticks or something like that. Okay, so I'm done with like new spell ideas for the most part. So one big issue that I have with Holy Priest in Raid is you can't like directly sub in a Holy Priest for a Discipline Priest. So when you're on a raid team and you say, "Hey, I want to play Holy Priest on this fight," your raid leader might say, "No, we can't do that yet. We're not deep enough into farm. We would have to rewrite all the raid cooldowns in order to accommodate you being holy, because holy has a 2 minute cooldown and disc has a minute and a half cooldown. So what I would want to do to fix this is, and I think it's possible now that salvation has been removed, so it's not like you can't have a minute and a half cooldown. When we had salvation, it was something like you could swap in holy for disc and you'd use like salvation for the first disc ramp, then you'd use him for the second one, and then the third one you might have to do something. But you could kind of sort of make it work by having salvation and him, but Apotheosis is not a substitute for a disc ramp in any way, shape, or form. It's like a rotational helper. What I really would like Blizzard to do is make Divine Hymn a 1.5 minute cooldown when you talent into reduced cooldown, and I would like them to make it a little bit stronger when you have it as a 3 minute cooldown. So that's really the main thing I want Blizzard to do, so that it just makes it easier to swap from Holy to Disc and you can still cover the same spots for your group. So if Blizzard is reluctant to make that like 1.5 minute Divine Hymn change, I really want them to do something about Apotheosis. Like there's two things they could do. One of them would be good for Mythic Plus and the other would be like cool for Raid. The issue with Apotheosis when compared to like other healing cooldowns, if you compare it to like Healing Tide Totem, if you compare it to Ascendance, Ascendance is kind of like Apotheosis. It's the most direct comparable spell. Ascendance does a massive burst of healing when you use the ability, and it feels good to use because it does a big burst of healing, and that's why it's such a powerful raid cooldown. Now, Holy Priest Ascendance, all it does is reset your holy words. So it does zero healing during that effect, and so you have to cast it before the damage comes out, and then it just like makes you a little bit stronger rotationally during that spell. But it doesn't do any raid healing, and the problem with Holy Priest right now is you have one raid cooldown, and that's Divine Hymn, and it's on a 2 minute cooldown. Like, how is that fair compared to all these other healers? They have big raid cooldowns that heal every single person in the party, and Holy Priest is sitting there with just Divine Hymn right now. When we had Salvation, we were like much more balanced, and they were even taken to Race to World first, but they weren't taken this time, and I think it's because we have one raid cooldown, and the whole raid is damaged. You have to have a raid cooldown. If you did take Apotheosis off the GCD, that would be like really, really a big boon for Holy and Dungeons. So before we talk about like how to fix Holy, I don't want to be like too greedy. Like if we look at the Holy utility versus the Disc utility, you see that like they both have the power infusion, they both have fortitude, mind soothe, mass dispel, and then symbol of hope versus barrier. I'm going to talk about that a little later, but they should be balanced a little better. They're not very balanced right now. Guardian Spirit and 2 minute 2 pain suppressions is relatively balanced. Like you have a minute and 10-second Guardian Spirit versus a minute and 30-second pain suppression cooldown. I think Psychic Scream is pretty balanced. It's actually a little better as Holy because Holy has an incentive to stay in melee so they can use Holy Nova. Whereas Disc oftentimes wants to play at ranged even in dungeons, and they don't use Psychic Scream as often as a Holy Priest. Then Holy Priest has a little bit of a boon where we have Chastise to interrupt some spells. And then Disc has very large shields, which are extremely sought after in Mythic Plus, and they have passive damage, which is extremely sought after in Mythic Plus. And Holy doesn't have anything else. So Holy is missing something. It needs a little bit of extra help, and I have some ideas for that. So my new spell ideas, one I called Admonish. So it replaces Censure, and my issue with Censure is it costs an additional talent point. So you're spending 2 talent points to get a stun. That is absolutely insane and it is outdated. Like, that's something that you would see in the beta of these new talents. And I'm not really sure why it's not a choice node with Holy Word Chastise. So I don't think this new spell Admonish would be OP. What it does is it is an AoE CC, and in order to balance it, what I said is okay, so you replace Chastise, and it cannot be reduced by casting your damage spells. So it's a 1 minute cooldown, or maybe 45 seconds, whatever you want to choose, and it stuns all targets in a nearby area. Now, if that's not Blizzard's cup of tea, and they want to give Holy some other CC ability, I have a really cool spell called Pacifying Him. So it's a 2 second channel, and all monsters within 20 yards become passive, and they cannot attack, and they cannot cast spells. I don't think this would actually become unbalanced in PvP, because like Blizzard is terrified of giving Priest another CC for PvP, and this CC wouldn't stop people from healing, so it's not like it would be unbalanced in 2v2 because it would just reduce damage and it would still allow the healer on the enemy team to do healing. So I think it's actually almost a perfect spell to add, and you would be able to still interrupt and silence or kick the Holy Priest while they're casting this ability. So I think it would actually be insanely balanced and not overpowered at all, and it would give Holy something in dungeons to make them a little more on par with, say, a Resto Shaman, a Mistweaver Monk, a Resto Druid. They all have like multiple ways to interrupt mobs in the group, and Holy Priest is one of the non-DR healers, so it needs another CC or something, or a DR, give us barrier, give us something. We need something more to be on par with these other healers. All we have is power infusion and fortitude. That's not enough. We need shields, we need CC, we need something. And next is a Symbol of Hope. It's not a new talent, but it really needs to go back to being a 1 minute reduction of cooldown in dungeons. It would go a long way to make it more balanced with Barrier. I still think Barrier is much superior than Symbol of Hope, even at 1 minute, but it would be a little bit better. Oh, and then I already mentioned this, but Censure needs to be a choice node, not an extra talent point. The fact that it costs 2 talent points to get a stun is absurd. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is Holy Fire. So I think Holy Fire is in a pretty good place, but I think that it should refund mana when you use it. And I thought a long time about how to fix mana for Holy Priest and not make it broken in raid. Like, Holy Priest is a very simple healer, and I understand that Blizzard wants you to like part of the skill expression of Holy Priest, especially with the removal of Salvation, is your ability to manage your mana. So to tie mana efficiency to Holy Fire would be really good because it's not used that often in raid, and it's a sacrifice for HPS to gain mana. Whereas in dungeons, you're constantly casting Chastise and then doing 2 Holy Fires thereafter, so it would at least pay for the cost of Chastise if Holy Fire refunded mana. And it would make builds like Prayer of Healing actually viable in dungeons, because as it stands, you can really only cast like 2 or 4 Prayer of Healings a minute without like running your mana bar down. So if you could like get some refund on mana from casting Holy Fire, that would really make those other builds more viable. The next thing I wanted to talk about is Dispersing Light and Trail of Light. They are not balanced at all. So Dispersing Light does 20% increased healing when you cast a heal or a flash heal, and Trail of Light does 25%. So my suggestion is to make it 6 or 7% for Dispersing Light so that it's actually 24 or a little higher than Trail of Light. And Holy Priest, one of its biggest weaknesses is AoE healing. The second thing I think we should do to fix AoE healing, and I think this should be done across the board, like every single healer needs more dungeon modifiers, not just discipline. Like you see right here, Discipline's dungeon modifier is Atonement. So Atonement is Disc Priest's rotational spell, and it's their major cooldown. What they've done for dungeon modifiers so far with the other healers is they've just buffed their major cooldown. So Holy Priest dungeon modifier currently is Divine Hymn, and that's the only thing with a dungeon modifier. But our AoE spells do not have a dungeon modifier. So Prayer of Healing is substantially weaker than Atonement. The same goes for like a Resto Shaman's Chain Heal or a Resto Druid's Wild Growth. Like those spells should be buffed. Like they need to do more than just buff major cooldowns. They need to buff the AoE spells. Like the game is pretty balanced when it comes to single target spells. AoE spells are very unbalanced in dungeons in my opinion. To fix this for Holy, I think they need to like add another dungeon modifier to Holy Word Sanctify, and then maybe a third one to Prayer of Healing, and they should do that same thing with Shaman's Chain Heal. Next thing I want to talk about is Prayer of Healing. My issue with Prayer of Healing is it has way too many talents attached to it, and you have to use all three of them to even make them usable, and you still run out of mana if you use them all. Prayer Circle, first of all, should be baseline, and that will leave room for another Prayer of Healing talent or another talent that they want to add. Then you'd add that talent that I suggested, Prayer's Echo, which is like Nourish to make Prayer of Healing apply double mastery. And if you want to give Holy Priest like a Prayer of Healing buff in dungeons, then you get rid of this. But something needs to be done, and Prayer of Healing is pretty viable now, but it's still too expensive. And if you give us more mana from Holy Fire, I'll accept it. But if you're not going to do that, then reduce the cost a little bit or make Prayerful Litany baseline and it's only a 2 cost talent because it's too expensive to take. The next rotational spell I wanted to talk about is Prayer of Mending. Prayer of Mending has gone through a number of iterations. At one point, you could have 3 times as many Prayer of Mendings on a target as you could cast with one spell. So when you can cast 7 Prayer of Mendings at a time, it could go all the way up to 21. Now, there's a new talent called Divine Service, which makes Prayer of Mending heal 4% more for each bounce left on the target. I think if they just changed that talent so it was 4% more up to 14 stacks, then you would be allowed to make Prayer of Mending stack up to 21 times. Now, why does Prayer of Mending have to stack up to 21 times? Well, when you play Oracle Priest, you can cast 4 Prayer of Mendings in a row. You're going to have so many Prayer of Mendings out on the group that it's only going to be able to bounce between 2 different targets at once. So Prayer of Mending code is written in such a way that it prefers to bounce to people who don't have 14 stacks. So if all the group is at 14 stacks except for 2 of them, it's going to bounce between 2 people. And that's really not how the spell is supposed to work. The spell is supposed to bounce to the most injured person. Otherwise, it's like a dumb heal. So it is not a very smart heal. Like because it has this conditions, and when you have so many Prayer of Mendings out, like it's gonna bounce between 2 different people. And to make matters worse, Prayer of Mending it just is such a pain to always be focusing, okay, I'm gonna try to cast this Prayer of Mending on this person. Oh shoot, the Prayer of Mending just bounced, so he has 14 stacks now. I just casted a Prayer of Mending and I got nothing out of it. No other healer has a rotational spell that is such a pain that is gonna be so easy to overwrite because it's bouncing to a target with low health, and you want to heal a target with low health, so you want to put Prayer of Mending on the guy who has low health, and it's gonna overcap the stacks. So it's not something that happens like all the time, but it might happen once a pack in Mythic Plus dungeon, and that's just way too much to waste an entire global because the game moved the Prayer of Mending to the target you were casting it on, and during the time it was traveling to that person, they already got a new Prayer of Mending, and so now you have like overcapped stacks. So one of the last things I wanted to talk about is Oracle. So I have a couple issues with Oracle. Premonition of Piety at very high keys runs into an issue where you're spending an entire heal on yourself and it heals you up to full and then like does barely any overhealing. So, what my hope is that they change Premonition of Piety to just any healing, not overhealing, just all healing and overhealing. That would make it so at higher level dungeons, you could still play Oracle and still use Premonition of Piety and get some effective healing out of it. Now, I understand they don't want to do this for Disc because Disc is already too strong, so just do this change for Holy. That'd be cool. Another problem is Premonition of Solace. What happens when you remove the shield is you lose that 15% damage reduction. So what they need to do is untether the damage reduction from the shield. So when you cast Solace, it should give the target damage reduction for 15 seconds even if the shield expires. It's our only tank external as Holy. Like we have Guardian Spirit, but it's kind of a fake tank external. So we really need Solace to be strong. And if they can do this, I would be quite happy.